It's insane to think that The Weeknd began his career with mixtapes like this, and then years later, 10 years later in fact, became a halftime performer at the Super Bowl just over a week ago. The progression is pretty insane. This man has hit after hit after hit now, one of the biggest names in popular music. And this is where he started, this here, House of Balloons. A mixtape that is, in my opinion, one of the best of the 2010s, and a lot of people would hold that opinion too. I think House of Balloons is that highly regarded. A turning point for R&B in the 2010s, which again, we probably didn't know at the time, but certainly as time's gone on, we have realized that many artists wanted to follow in the footsteps of Abel and offer this nihilistic, dreary R&B sound that dominated the charts for years. You could look to other artists like Drake too, and you could even maybe say that Frank Ocean had a little bit of an influence on this alternative R&B sound, although maybe not in the same way that The Weeknd did, because House of Balloons really is the outgoing rebellious brother of Nostalgia Ultra, which came out the same year. I think they, under the covers, under the wraps, influenced the genre in different ways, although you probably have heard more songs that The Weeknd inspired, and artists like Drake too, in the charts than you did Frank Ocean. House of Balloons kicks things off with such an expensive track, instantly setting itself up for the rest of the mixtape. I think you know exactly what's going to come from this point onwards, just very, very lavish production that's kind of presenting itself as a classier version of itself in a lot of ways. Like, the production makes everything sound so classy and rich, but then when you dig deeper into the lyrics, you realize that actually there's a lot of crap. Not that the lyrics were crap, I don't mean that all the lyrics are bad, I didn't mean that. I meant that, you know, you've got this rich, lavish, expensive house filled with all the materials you could ever want, could ever ask for, the money you could ever want, could ever ask for, but like in the floorboards or hidden in the walls, you got like asbestos ruining everything, and actually it's not the great lifestyle that it may appear to be from the outside, which I really think that Abel does a fantastic job of presenting on this album, because I think you could on the surface read these lyrics and think it's all just kind of like braggadocious, general, I guess, glorification of this lifestyle, but it really isn't when you kind of dig deeper into what he's saying a lot of the time. Sure, you do have tracks like What You Need, which is essentially a filthier version of Treat You Better by Shawn Mendes, but much of the other tracks do tend to offer something slightly different to this, which is essentially, you know, a song about, look, this guy, he's not good enough for you, he's a virgin and I'm the Chad, with his seductive and whispery vocals. I don't know, man, I think there'd be a lot of girls out there that would find it quite hard to not tempt themselves to go with a guy that's offering himself like this, unless you're a bit more in tune and you realize that actually he's a bit of a sleazy guy, and you know, the rest of this album showcases that he's a bit of a how to put it bluntly, well, not bluntly, I don't know, maybe I just have to be blunt actually, a bit of an emotional wreck. House of Balloons is essentially the title track of the album, not only in the sense that it literally is the title track, but it also feels like the centerpiece of the album, what this album is really about. It explores the theme in probably one of the best ways I think you could really with a theme like this. It's probably one of the most compelling party songs there is out there. I mean, the nihilistic tone of the track really sets itself up so perfectly, and a lot of the other tracks do that on this album too, with a very forceful beat. You've got Sushi and the Banshees being sampled here too. The bloody beat switch, god damn, beat switches were such a big part of hip-hop and even R&B in the 2010s, mostly hip-hop I'd say, But this truly was one of the best I think we ever had. That forceful beat just takes charge in the second half and becomes a really like thudding, kind of like gunshot type thing going on. It sounds fantastic. The Morning then depicts, I guess, sort of what it's like living in the morning after parties like this. It's much more of a descriptive track of the lifestyle that he lives, and talking about, you know, the strippers, the prostitutes, and how he essentially is finding it hard not to fall in love with them because he just seems to attach himself to any woman that'll give him some kind of attention. Once again, sounding fantastic. The production here is really, really strong for a mixtape. I know that sounds like I'm being, you know, a bit backhanded by saying that, but I think, you know, mixtapes during this time, and maybe a bit earlier than this in the 2000s, weren't really known for the stylish production that they'd offer. It was usually just kind of artists using what they could and just sort of rapping over it, or singing in this case, and, you know, using samples that they weren't able to pass. Whereas this album just feels like a very fully realized, essential piece of art. When you look at some of his later albums that were labeled official studio albums, it's crazy, really, that this sounds probably the most consistent and concise piece of work he's ever done. And it wasn't supposed to be that way. The mixtapes were meant to be, you know, the starter piece to an artist's career, not the staple. Wicked Games being one of the singles on this one, I think it did catch a bit of traction too at the time. I think I've mentioned in this series before that 10 years ago, I was listening to very different music, so I can't say I knew any of these songs in 2011, but I think there were a few tracks that caught a bit of traction. The chorus on this one is fantastic. Listen, I'll give you all I got. Give me all of this. I need confidence. The singing is so catchy and it sounds so great here, and I think this is one of the more revealing moments lyrically as well. Once again, just finding an attachment in any woman that will be there at just that moment. It's kind of abusive in a lot of ways. Well, it is very abusive, perhaps to that woman and to himself too. And I think it ends up being juxtaposed fantastically with the drug party anthems that are flooded in this album, because it shows the other side to this lifestyle. The Party and After Party once again brings us back to the fun times that Abel has in probably his huge mansion or some shit, having all his friends over, just having a great time, having all the drinks and drugs in the world. And then right after that, the party is finished, as he mentions on the track Coming Down, which again repeats the cycle of doing these great nights where he's just having, you know, the most exciting times of his life. The elation, the atmosphere is electric, everything is just so exciting. But then the come down is realizing that he just can't help but fixate on girls that probably aren't going to show any interest in him in the ways that he wants them to show interest. And it's a cycle. It's a cycle that he keeps feeding into. He's perpetuating it, he's essentially condoning it, and yet he can't seem to get himself out of it, which I think is a very realistic way of making an album like this. You could just turn every track into a big party banger, and that's fine if you want to make an album like that, but he shows you the come down, he shows you the other side of it, he shows you the depression, he shows you the effects of pouring all kinds of drugs into your body, he shows you the loneliness, everything that is just encapsulated in this lifestyle. And while he's not the sharpest writer out there, he's certainly not on the level of perhaps, you know, a Frank Ocean in terms of really emotional lyricism. I think he paints the picture perfectly with his words, and he doesn't need to have the most flashy writing out there to do what he's doing on this mixtape here. The closing track is a fantastic way to end things off as well, 28. I like how this track deals with regret, looks at the mistakes he's made. And what I really like about this is how you could view it from two different angles, how he's looking at the regret of letting a girl in his house, or letting a girl see who he really is, while also flipping the perspective slightly and viewing it as a closing track that is dealing with the regret of the fact that he's let his fans and listeners and perhaps fame get in the way and showing, everyone on the outside his actual life. I just really like how it could be viewed in different ways, two different perspectives. He's regretting letting a girl in and being broken and emotionally wrecked afterwards. And you could view it from the fact that he's letting people in on his lifestyle and potentially ruining his image, and therefore giving people an insight into who he is, and perhaps that could be a huge mistake in the long run. Did it end up being that way though? I'm not sure. I mean, there are definitely people that don't like The Weeknd, but I don't know if they're the reasons they don't like The Weeknd. I see a lot of people just think he's too dreary and too monotonous with his lyrics, and essentially just ends up being dull, a bit sad, a bit melodramatic, which I think all of those words do describe his music, particularly this mixtape here. But I think the production is fantastic. I think he sells the story so well. I think the singing is great too. You can see that he's always been influenced by Michael Jackson or singers from that era, but I think he makes it his own. He still has a distinct tone to his voice. And again, for a mixtape, this sounds very professional. And I think it's great. I think it truly is a very, very, very good mixtape, and probably the best thing we've really ever heard from The Weeknd. And honestly, the best we'll ever hear him do this. I know people absolutely adored After Hours, but I think the slower, melodramatic tracks that he tried on that album pale in comparison to the ones that he does here, in my opinion. I'm hungry for more pop stuff from The Weeknd, because he keeps teasing us with every album where he's got like 3 or 4 tracks that are just absolutely smash banging hits, and then the rest of the album falls back into his usual old self with this kind of R&B music. Go the whole way, man. Don't be afraid to just give us an album full of tracks like Blinding Lights, In Your Eyes, Save Your Tears, Can't Feel My Face, Starboy, endless other tracks, because this man has hits for days. But this will always be a truly great way to start off your career, and it's stood the test of time like crazy too. I think this album sounds fantastic 10 years later. It doesn't sound a day old, and yeah, I love it. I think it's great. It took a long time to grow on me, by the way. I initially thought this was terrible, but maybe I was maybe that was back in my like Fantano days, and every review I saw of his, I was like, I agree with everything he says, because I was a bit of a drone. That's just how it is when you're first getting into music. But I did eventually see the light, and I do not think this is bad at all. I think it's quite the opposite. So thank you for watching. I do hope you enjoyed my perspective of this mixtape, House of Balloons, The Weeknd, a decade later. Let me know what I should review and talk about in this series later on too. Would be great. Lots of albums and mixtapes to pick from, to choose from 2011. And I hope this was a great addition to the series. I enjoyed doing this video. I hope you guys enjoyed my analysis of the lyrics and The Weeknd's troubled persona that he presents on this album or mixtape. I do hope you enjoyed it. Do hope you subscribe if you haven't already as well. Thank you. Have a good day and goodbye.